Hello, folks. So I'm JP Hornick. I'll take 1 second and just introduce the rest of the team. Jonathan Singer, who's the vice chair of the team from Local 560. We have Katie Flynn from Local 354 at Durham College. We have Michelle Arbor from Local 125 at Lambton. Ravi Ramkasunsing from Local 242 Niagara. Rebecca Ward from Local 732 at Confed, and Sean Pentecost from Local 415 at Algonquin. We also have with us tonight Heather Petrie, who's our negotiator, and Megan Park, who is our campaigns officer. So we welcome them all. All these folks are going to be available answering questions in the background, and then also when we get to the Q&A at the end. We tried to keep this a lot shorter so that we had more time for questions. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. Where we are right now in the bargaining process is that the employer has asked for a forced offer vote. This is something that they can do exactly once during the bargaining process. The offer has been scheduled by mutual consent from, and it's scheduled by the Ontario Labour Relations Board from February 15th at 9 a.m. until February 17th at 3 p.m. It is once again an online vote, and that tends to mean higher participation. I want to be very clear. The ballot has two choices. Either I accept the employer's offer received on January 17th, 2022, or I reject the employer's offer received on January 17th, 2022. And we want to be very upfront. The bargaining team is absolutely recommending that you vote to reject this offer. If we believed that this was an offer that was good for faculty, that was actually the best negotiated settlement that could be reached, or the best settlement at all that could be reached, we would have brought it to you directly ourselves and asked you to vote for it. But it's not. It is exactly the same offer that they tabled back in November, and that was voted down via the strike authorization mandate. There are literally 10 words different between the November offer and the January 17 offer. And that basically it's that if the parties can't reach or agree upon a neutral chair, then William Kaplan, the independent arbitrator, the very arbitrator indeed that is the one we recommended for voluntary binding interest arbitration that the college has rejected, but this is their language. So for this, William Kaplan is fine, and he will choose the chair, quote, from among the names proposed by the CEC and OPSU. The previous iteration of this had him that the chair would be selected via final offer selection. So that's it. The rest of the offer has remained exactly the same. Now, we're going to go through in a little bit of detail about why we're recommending that you reject. If, however, you have questions about your eligibility for the voting process or the voting process itself, please go to collegefaculty.org, where we have an FAQ listed there on the website about, how do I check my voter eligibility? What do I do in order to make sure I can vote? Because our goal is to make sure that no possible voter, no possible faculty member who is eligible to vote is disenfranchised. So if you are a full-time or a partial load member, faculty member, you are eligible to vote. If you're not sure, check collegefaculty.org or check with your local. Now, why are we recommending that you reject this offer? It has been a long, hard road for all of us, for sure. And we've been doing everything we can to make sure that we can bring you the best possible offer that addresses your demands. The trick, however, is that the CEC offer fails to address any of faculty's concerns in a meaningful way. There is no meaningful change. They have taken the minimal possible that they could from earlier faculty proposals, and they've stripped them of any action or implementation processes. Their theme this round is about preserving their own power and control. It's not even about money, but it's certainly not about what's right for students, for faculty, or for the system, period. Basically, they've taken ideas from our proposals and then rendered them powerless. So the CEC's offer, it contains nothing to stop the contracting out of faculty work, and there's no job protection for partial load faculty, for counselors, for librarians, or for coordinators. And this is, when you look at it, the college sector has revenues that are rising. We have $1.6 billion surplus, according to the Auditor General, over the past 5 years. That includes during the pandemic. And yet the conditions for us all have been worsening. So there's way more managers, but the number of full-time faculty member has remained stagnant, right? And enrollment has increased dramatically as well over that time. The gap is being filled by precarious workers. The gap is being filled by deals with private colleges that target international students and that are not interested in quality, but are interested in profit. We still have 3/4 of our faculty, 75% of our faculty are operating on short-term 4-month contracts with very little benefits and very little job security. Their offer does not address anything to do in a meaningful way about workload issues or about online learning. So there's no dispute. We're going to get into this in a little more detail, but really at the heart of it is that there's no dispute resolution process in their workload proposals. Our workload keeps increasing. They've been pushing for workload maximization. We know from their earlier positions that they are really trying to target apprenticeship, aviation, upgrading, clinical placement supervisors, other specialized programs, and trying to expand the two-tiering of that workload. So on top of that, there's no way to make binding recommendations. It's not a co-chaired system. It is simply about the colleges making sure that they can maintain control and not have to implement any of the recommendations that come forward. There's nothing in there, similarly, that meaningfully addresses equity, diversity, and inclusion, or anything really around indigenization, decolonization, and truth and reconciliation. When we're looking at these committees, we're looking at things in our proposals that would require them to actually implement changes. So for workload, for example, our proposal ensured a comprehensive review of all faculty workload, all of it. That included partial load professors and instructors, counselors, and librarians. That's what they're fighting against, the fact that they would have to address specifically and meaningfully the workload for all faculty. It would also ensure in our proposals that the data-driven recommendations from that task force would be implemented in the next collective agreement. This would be our 5th workload task force. We cannot be sold again down the river around this kind of notion that, just trust us and we'll make sure it happens. The CEC has never changed workload in order to improve conditions for faculty, period. What they have done is in 2009, the last time they imposed terms and conditions, they cherry-picked the 2 things that they wanted out of the workload task force and put them in the forced offer. And that was the modified workload arrangements. And to make it a little bit sweet, they gave everybody 1 extra complimentary hour for full-timers in order to deal with normal administrative tasks. That's it. That's the only 2 changes we've seen since 1985. On top of this, when you look at, I'll talk about their indigenization and decolonization table next. There's also no language in their offer that would allow partial load faculty improvements in bridging their benefits. Right now, partial load faculty, again, 4-month contracts, can only bridge their benefits if they have a written contract for the next semester. I've been teaching in this system since 1997 as both partial load, sessional, and full-time. And I can promise you that I know very few partial loads that get a written contract for the next semester before the next semester begins. Faculty's proposals were that the offer of employment, that email that partial loads get that says, hey, I've got some work for you next semester, would be enough to allow the faculty member to bridge their benefits. to allow their kids, their families to have access to dental care, to healthcare, to paramedical services for those weeks in between contracts. It would mean they wouldn't have to restart the waiting period every time they're rehired in the same job. It costs the employer nothing, and that's what they're refusing to include in this final offer vote. They also refuse to acknowledge that faculty consent is required before the college can reuse, hand off, or sell the course material that has been created by faculty. Right now, according to the Auditor General, 11 public colleges have so-called partnership agreements with private colleges as of June 2021. And the Ford government has clearly stated that they want to expand that number, that they see an increased role for private colleges and other forms of privatizations in the publicly assisted system. The colleges are selling faculty work or handing off faculty work to these private interests without faculty knowledge often, let alone consent. That practice perpetuates the erosion of faculty work. It means that our bargaining unit work is going outside of the system entirely. It also allows the Ontario colleges to be one of the few post-secondary systems in North America where intellectual property rights are not enshrined in the collective agreement. This is not an unusual feature in post-secondary. IP rights are a given outside of the Ontario college system. The CEC committees, as I mentioned earlier, it's all talk and no action. Without a dispute resolution process, it means there's no way to ensure that changes will happen. Instead, the CEC has taken a perspective or a position that's trust us to do the right thing. We promise you we're going to listen to faculty. We promise you we're going to try and think really hard about workload. And we promise you that we understand that change is needed. What they won't say is that we commit to implementing those changes as soon as those recommendations come out and to ensure that they are included in the next collective agreement. They are selling us the same line that they've been selling us since 1985. Trust us, we're partners in this, even though we refuse to negotiate it at the table, and even though we'd rather impose terms and conditions rather than actually have a discussion about the importance of this and find a middle path through it. Even though they won't agree to voluntary binding interest arbitration to settle those outstanding issues with the very same arbitrator they proposed themselves. So on workload, as I've talked about, our 1985 factors under the CEC's proposal would remain in play until at least 2024, and there's no guarantee that they would change even after that. Now, let's talk about our workload. At the highest, at the essay project factor, we have just over 5 minutes per week per student for evaluation. That doesn't include routine and assisted, and that doesn't include in-process evaluation, and that's just for full-timers. We are not provided enough time to make online learning as engaging and universal as possible for our students. Our workload keeps growing, but our workload factors haven't changed. Our students actually deserve better. It's not just faculty. The impact that we're seeing in Work to Rule is if at the end of the week, those of you who are privileged and lucky enough to have a SWIF, if you look at the amount of time that you've been doing just to work to your SWIF, and then you examine the pile of evaluation work that's left over at the end of that, you can see just how much volunteer work you've been putting in for the college. And that's what the colleges depend upon. Without a dispute resolution process, all these recommendations that come out of this, basically CEC chaired committee would be non-binding. Nothing in the next collective agreement. And unlike every other committee that's outlined in our collective agreement, this is not a committee that would be co-chaired by the union and the employer. There is never such a thing as a neutral chair. The strongest committees are co-chaired by one of each, because you need that in order to ensure that you understand both sides of an argument. They're also looking to expand the two-tiering of apprenticeship, academic upgrading, aviation, clinical placements, specialized programs. So when we're looking at these groups, these are already areas where we see a two-tiering of workload. We had actually proposed to remove that. What we have is the difference between post-secondary and non-post-secondary means that the non-post-secondary programs teach more hours a week, more weeks a year, and they have, you know, basically a harder set of working conditions. We believe that that distinction should be moot. However, the colleges are looking to expand that. The CEC's proposal that this is based on is a version of their early extension offer as well. They told us at the table, if you don't take this offer, we're going to make it worse. And here's what we're going to do. And then they put out a management proposal that spelled out exactly how they see that two-tiering happening. They also wanted to target new faculty for different working conditions, including mandatory work on weekends without the ability to say no or consent, and expanded hours over the course of the day, as well as a differential vacation formula. So when we're looking at a closer look of where you want to go, you can go to their own site and review Management Proposal 10A. That's their vision for workload. This is what they threatened at the table, and it outlines their end goals in relation to faculty workload. Again, the faculty proposal included all faculty workload. Every single one of us would have our workload examined in depth and with a data collection mechanism that formed the basis for those joint recommendations. Where we couldn't agree, it would go to Bill Kaplan, and he would be able to help decide what goes into the next collective agreement. So that's the difference between those. And they're trying to pretend that, you know, it's somehow that we are violating Bill 124 in the process of this. And I'll get to that next. On their equity, diversity, and inclusion and indigeneity, decolonization, truth and reconciliation work committees, again, no dispute resolution or implementation process. The other piece that seems kind of simple is that the recommendations for the EDI committee would go to the college president rather than the board of governors. That gives the college president sole authority around what gets implemented and what doesn't. It's not a representative body that helps make that decision. On the indigeneity, decolonization, and truth and reconciliation committee, what they call is a non-adversarial process actually just involves no commitment to dispute resolution or implementation as well. The scope and the mandate is so vague and limited as to be like almost nonsensical. What they're trying to say is that if a college is already engaged in work around truth and reconciliation, that this committee, the Indigeneity Decolonization Committee, would not be allowed to duplicate that work in any way. So it wasn't allowed to duplicate or conflict with the work that colleges may have already begun or undertaken. And the problem with that is that it doesn't acknowledge that that work isn't enough, or that there might be problems in the structure of that work itself. Now, the big thing they've been focusing on over the past little while is this notion that somehow faculty proposals are illegal, that to handle faculty workload, to look at the work, to attribute time for the work that's actually being done would somehow violate Bill 124. I'm going to walk us through this, but I'm going to start very simply. That is a blatant lie. We have spoken with lawyers, both at OPSU and external. We have consulted with the Canadian Association of University Teachers, the Ontario Coalition of University Faculty Associations, to look at how post-secondary collective agreements have been settled, what kinds of things were happening in them, what kind of response did the Ontario Treasury Board have to existing collective agreements, where else in the public sector were these kinds of proposals coming up, and how are they being determined? Not one of our proposals violates Bill 124 in any way, shape, or form. The CEC keeps claiming this, but we have asked them repeatedly for evidence of how this workload demands would violate Bill 124. They've not been able to provide that. Indeed, our own lawyer at OPSU said, listen, if they truly believed that position, then they would take it to the Ontario Labor Relations Board as a bad faith bargaining process, because when you bargain deliberately an illegal position to impasse, which is where we are, then that is clearly bright light bad faith bargaining. They've actually stayed their bad faith bargaining claim that didn't even address this at all, that they filed prior to imposing terms and conditions as a way to discredit the team. So that's just even been put on hold, and Bill 124 wasn't even mentioned in that. So the proposals on workload were on the table for 2.5 months before the CEO of the CEC, Graham Lloyd, came up with the claim that they are unlawful after presumably having one conversation with somebody at the Treasury Board. In that conversation, he misrepresented our proposals as involving less work for more pay or the same pay. Lori Rancourt has since said in the press that it violates Bill 124 because they'd have to hire more faculty. When we've taken this to multiple lawyers, we have not found anyone that agrees with the CEC's position. The only people that can determine whether something goes to the bar or not of Bill 124 is the Treasury Board. And there is nothing, this has never been adjudicated, because there is nothing in any collective agreement that's been settled where the collective agreement has been prevented from correctly attributing workload time. In other words, this is work we're already doing. This is not new work. We're not asking for more pay for less work. We're asking for the workload to be attributed in the formula. There's also a limit only on compensation, and total compensation under Bill 124 refers to salary and benefits and individuals. It's not about the overall human resources costs or additional hiring that may or may not result from 124. The proposal to increase evaluation time captures work the faculty have already been engaged in. As I said before, all you have to do is look at how much of your work is left over at the end of the week when you follow your SWOOF. Bill 124 does not prevent work that is already being done from being captured in a collective agreement. Second, and this is related, if capturing the actual work done by faculty resulted in the need to hire more faculty, that would also be allowable under Bill 124. The need to hire more nurses, for example, was allowable. Addressing the labor needs of a particular public sector is completely within the bounds of Bill 124. Staffing increases are not part of our workload proposals. There's a reason that you don't see staffing ratios in this round's proposals from faculty. And that is because that would have been a violation of Bill 124. We couldn't keep those in. Instead, we went for the workload itself to get the correct attribution. That's allowable. If hiring was a consequence of our proposals down the line, that's not our issue to solve. And there are many, many other possible ways that the employer could address any necessary changes from hiring or from the workload proposals. Hiring more faculty is one of a number of paths. Once again, Bill 124 is total compensation, wages and benefits. It does not support the CEC's false arguments. These are basically just lies. They're misrepresenting the benefits piece as well around dental implants. I want to say this, and around cannabis. What the CEC is saying about their cannabis, like, oh, faculty just want medical cannabis and we've given them $4,000. What we asked for from the CEC was a costing of their cannabis proposal, because we wanted to know, they told us there's money left over in the Bill 124 cap. So we wanted to know how much money was left, how much is being applied for this, their proposal around medical cannabis. Can we look at reducing the cap on medical cannabis so that we can apply it to a different kind of benefit like dental implants? And they have steadfastly refused to provide the information we need to bargain effectively on benefits, and instead keep focusing everybody's attention on pot. Now, medical cannabis is absolutely necessary for a number of our faculty. It was one of the demands that came out of the 24 colleges. It's good for rheumatoid arthritis. It's good for pain reduction. It's good for, appetite stimulation. It's good for any glaucoma. There's a whole host of treatments that cannabis can be used for, and it's with a prescription. This isn't about people walking down to their completely legal local pot shop. This is about having to get a prescription from your doctor for a medical condition. So it affects a very, very tiny number of faculty. And we wanted to take that extra money and apply it to broader benefits. These are the things they're not telling you about their offer. And the simplest answer to, is Bill 124 violated by faculty proposals? No. The CEC's claim is a lie. Period. End of story. If they truly thought it was illegal, they would either take it to voluntary binding interest arbitration, because there's no arbitrator that will allow illegal language into a collective agreement, period. Or they would take it to the Ontario Labor Relations Board so that we could prove them wrong there too. What I would recommend that you do is follow the money, because Bill 124 means the 1% wage cap that all of us, regardless of partial load or full-time status, and the current cost of living, are taking a 3.8% cut in our real wages. Yet management salaries have increased at a rate of about 5% per year. So over the past 5 years, on average, managers below the president, so the president's at a salary cap, everybody else could change titles or change positions in order to get a bump, or they could just take a bump. Bill 124 doesn't apply to managers. It only applies to unionized workers. So management salaries over the past 5 years have been 25% on average in the system as an increase. And the colleges continue to hire managers. If you look at your hirings or your job postings at each of your colleges, take a look at it over the past couple of years and see how many full-time faculty positions went up. Then take a look and see how many management positions went up. And as I said earlier, the colleges have a $1.6 billion surplus over the last 5 years. The colleges have money in their reserve funds. Those reserve funds are intended for emergencies such as, I don't know, a global pandemic that lasts for 2 years. These are the choices that they are making with how they spend their money. And just as a concrete example, let's take a look at Bill 124 for managers. And we'll just use the college's bargaining team as an example. As I said, Bill 124 only applies to collective agreement settlements. In other words, only those unionized workers. It is a direct attack on public services by the government. Managers at the colleges are exempt. That's why they've gotten these 5% year-over-year increases. The other folks who are exempt are the CECs, the College Employer Council CEO, their vice president, their director of labor relations. We don't know how much they make, and that's because they are not subject to disclosure laws. They're not even subject to freedom of information requests. So all we know is that the president's, the highest paid president of a college makes over $400,000 a year. When you're looking at the CEO Graham Lloyd, it's got to be in the neighborhood of between the lowest paid college president and the highest paid college president. Their salaries at the CEC are set by the Council of College Presidents. In other words, those are the college presidents, each of the 24 colleges, the boards of governors. That's who governs the CEC. That's who sets their salaries. And so those salaries are also funded by fees that our colleges pay to the College Employer Council to keep them running, so that they can bargain with us in the way that they're doing, or not bargain with us. But just for perspective, let's take a look at the salary increases for the college administrators who actually serve on the college's bargaining team. So if you take a look at this over the past 5 years, what we can see is their top senior vice president, who's the chair of their team, Lori Rancourt. Now, it's important to remember that this would change significantly because she retired in September of 2021. She's staying on just to finish the bargaining, apparently. So she's only seen a 4% increase. Stephanie Ball, however, 16%. That's the vice chair. The other members, it ranges from 33 to 51% increases in 5 years. even when you account for a position change. In Ian's case, it was from a dean to an associate VP. You can still see from 2018 to 2020, he went from $167,000 to $190,000. When you look at the title changes, and title changes are just a fancy way of saying we wanted to give you a raise and needed to get around any of the salary caps that were already in play. That goes for Janina Gorenka, who received 34% and 36% increases, respectively. Les Casson, who stayed in the same title and the same position, still managed to score a 33% increase over 5 years. So when we talk about who's violating, maybe not the law of Bill 124, but the principle of how we should be bargaining and how the money at the colleges should be spent, let's take a look at our employers before we take a look at each other, shall we? Because we are not fighting over the paltry 1% per year for 3 years that we are forced to take under legislation. Instead, we turned our energies and our commitment to making things better for students. And this group of people has been happily pocketing significant increases while bargaining against making the system stronger and the working conditions better that form the learning conditions for our students. So I gotta say, I'm getting a little bit passionate and frustrated with what's happening at the table these days, or the lack of a table. The other thing that we've heard a lot from over the past little bit from the CEC, but also from faculty, because you're getting these repeated messages from them, is what happens when we reject the vote? Are we going automatically out on strike, right? If I say no to this offer, does that mean I'm walking a picket line the next day? I can promise you that's not going to happen. There's also one other thing I can promise. There's one guarantee. If you accept their offer, your working conditions aren't getting any better. That's a promise. This is it. What you have right now is what they have on offer. And you won't have strike protection anymore. What you have right now, the work to rule that you're engaged in right now, that thing that we're hearing from many, many faculty, made you realize just how bad the working conditions are, that goes away. If you reject the offer, your conditions certainly won't get any worse, and any settlement that's reached, whether it's at the table or through binding interest arbitration, will have to improve on what's here now, because faculty will have clearly rejected this as not enough. It's important to know too that management can't force another offer vote. This is their last kick at the can. This is the only kick at the can. This is actually the last tool they have in their arsenal. Are they going to lock us out? No, they're not going to lock us out. They've already told us repeatedly they're not going to lock us out, but they also can't afford to lock us out, right? So we're not in a situation where we should be worried about lockout, and we're not in a situation where we need to be worried about like immediately being out on strike on February 19th or 18th. In December, the CEC told you if you voted in favor of a strike, we'd be picketing immediately after we got the strike authorization. In fact, they were wrong then, and they're going to be wrong again. What we did was get creative. We knew that in the middle of a pandemic, at the end of a semester, with our students losing their capacity to like really engage with their learning, and with faculty feeling so burnt out, the last thing that any of us wanted to do was be walking a picket line. That would have been sheer foolishness. What we needed to do was to send a clear message to them that faculty's volunteer work is what makes this system run, and we want to be acknowledged for it. We've been sitting here for 40 years waiting for acknowledgement of workload. This is the time to make that happen. So we went on work to rule. Be clear, you're on strike right now. Work to rule is a form of strike action, period. There are many creative ways to take strike action, and work to rule is one of them. And what the CEC has responded with is fear mongering. They've been using captive audience tactics of, forcing faculty to get email through the college systems. They've been doing union busting all over the place. Their goal is to weaken all faculty. That's their goal, not just for this round of negotiations, but broadly. All you have to do is think about how long they've been fighting and how many millions and millions of dollars they've spent to prevent us from counting the votes that part-time and sessional people took in order to join the union. That's where they want to put their money. We're talking in the neighborhood now of tens of millions of dollars is going to fight from people having collective bargaining rights. They have no interest in collaboration at the table. And so why would we believe them when they say, we'll collaborate you afterwards? We'll collaborate with you when this is done. We'll work with you on workload. If anybody believes that, I've got a fabulous bridge down in New York that I'm selling to. What they're interested in is distortions of truth and misrepresentations of faculty positions to meet their own ends. Their mantra is not dissimilar to really conservative tactics of, if I just repeat my version of a kind of fact long enough, you will eventually accept it as truth. If I keep telling you it's illegal, then eventually you're going to believe it's illegal. These are tactics that are used by populist right-wing politicians to ensure that we stop paying attention to the undercurrent and just look at the shiny things on the surface. But we know the faculty are too wise to do that. We understand, if we just tell you what's going on underneath, you're going to get it. If we were looking for a strike, we would have been on a picket line weeks ago. We've done everything we can as a team to avoid a full strike in the face of the most aggressive employer tactics we've seen since 2009. We have been creatively and strategically responding to what's happening throughout this process. And if I called every single team member to the front right now, we would tell you the same thing. It takes us to have a picket line, and none of us are calling for a picket line on February 18th, period. So that's another lie. The faculty team, we have a vested interest in improving our working conditions because we're faculty. We're not paid to do this. I'm not a paid negotiator. Nobody on this team is. We are all faculty, just like everyone else here. Our sole interest is in improving our working conditions and our students' learning conditions, because for many of us, we're going to be in this system for a really long time. And we want it to be a good job, not just for us, but for the people who are following us, who are lucky enough to get hired. So I'm going to ask you to ask yourselves, who is invested in improvements for faculty? Do you think it's the CEC? They're an arm's length government organization with zero transparency about decision-making, hiring, or their own salaries. We're putting it all out on the line for you because we are you. Our current offer, if we reject the management offer, the current offer of voluntary binding interest arbitration remains on the table. If we need to escalate, if they refuse to go to the table, if they refuse to go back to binding interest or to go to binding interest arbitration, then we will escalate because the employer has chosen to make escalation necessary. And that escalation will look like more pressure on the colleges. Currently in Work to Rule, we're in phase 2. We've been focusing on evaluation, SWIFT time, activities that happen in non-teaching periods. What are we going to do during reading week? And we've been trying to find ways for full-time and partial load faculty, for counselors and librarians to all apply very strategic surgical pressure on the administration. And it's working. That's why they called for the forced offer vote. In phase 3, that's the next phase. And that would happen if they refuse to continue to bargain. It will escalate slowly. We have some very good, creative, and simple ways to increase pressure on the admin without putting students in jeopardy. And so when I say what's coming, if necessary, is going to make it a lot harder on administration, but not a lot harder on faculty or students, I can promise you that's true. Before we got anywhere near a picket line, my friends, we have more phases of Work to Rule to get through. We also have very creative ways that we can approach any kind of full labor withdrawal. It doesn't have to be traditional picket lines. There's a lot of different paths we can go down. We know how stressful this is, and we're subject to the same conditions. Again, we have anywhere between, 12 and 20,000 people working in this system at any given point that are unionized. And for us, we know the responsibility that comes with that. and we do not take any action lightly, and we do not take any action without consultation with our presidents, all 24 local presidents, and our bargaining advisory committee of 32 additional people. So we don't actually take decisions without checking in with the people who are going to have to suffer with the consequences of those. But we also need you, right? This is the point at which we need to beat back this offer as resoundingly as possible. In 2017, we walked a picket line for 5 weeks, and we went from less than 60% of our membership, same as today, coming out and only voting 68% in favor of strike, if necessary. After 5 weeks on a line, we turned around, 95% of our membership voted 86% to reject the college's offer. And we need to do that again now. For us, it's about the ground game. It's essential for you to have one-to-one conversations with your colleagues, to talk to your local, to try and find out as much information as you can, because the success of this round is built on faculty talking with faculty. You can let people know that they've been on strike for 5 weeks again already, and it hasn't cost them a dime, but it has actually increase the pressure on the administrators to the point that they feel necessary to bring this offer vote directly to faculty and circumvent the team again. So I'm going to ask you to participate in your local phone trees, to talk to your colleagues, talk to your students. It is perfectly legitimate to talk to your students about what's happening in bargaining. Explain the issues from your perspective. And we have talking points here, but realistically, share your understanding about what you're hearing and why you're voting. And equally as important, listen to what other people have to say, even if they don't agree with you, right? Because that's the way we start to learn from each other about where the sticking points are. Counter the management propaganda with facts and ask them, who do you think is responsible for that decision? Is that in your interest? Is that in your students' interest? Why do you think that the colleges are making these decisions? Who does it hurt? And who has the power to change how that decision is being made? Redirect any anger and frustration back to the appropriate target. It's the college presidents who can make this stop, eh? When we propose task forces, remind people we ensure structures to address issues and implement recommendations, not to defer them. Management can resolve this with no further labor disruption, simply by either bargaining on faculty's issues or referring those outstanding issues to binding interest arbitration. Faculty proposals are about change now, but also about ensuring change going forward. They're all lawful and they're all low to no cost. If folks want to talk further, there's a couple of really exciting things coming up. On February 8th, we have a province-wide live Q&A for students from 7 to 9 p.m. Please let your students know that this is available. The CEC heard about it and they decided to do their own. They're pre-recording it and they're only taking questions ahead of time. The faculty one is absolutely live, just like this kind of setup where people get to ask questions. And then on from February 15th until February 17th, encourage as many people as you can to go out and vote to reject this offer. We are looking for massive turnout and high rejection. It's up to all of us to make that happen. I will say this, if you truly feel that your working conditions are fine as they are, if you think that partial load faculty don't deserve better access to benefits or better protections, if you think that, privatization, contracting out, or sale of faculty work isn't something we need to worry about, if equity and indigenization coordinator work, if you believe that we can trust the CEC to do the right thing without language to make sure that they do, and if you think that what we're working in right now is sustainable, then you should take the offer. But if you want to see change, if you think things need to happen, if you think that workload and fairness and the quality of education, these things have been core issues for faculty since long before the pandemic, since long before I was even in the system, and they were exacerbated further by the pandemic. As your team, as folks that have spent the last 10 months or a year actually looking through, examining, talking with faculty, we're asking you to do the right thing and reject this offer because it doesn't meet what you told us to take to the table. We need change and we need it now. This is why we're fighting and bargaining for better. And this is exactly why we're recommending that you vote to reject. So I want to thank you for your time, and we'll take whatever questions that you have.
Thank you so much, JP. That's a lot. And, I don't know if you want to have a sip of water. You've been giving us so much important stuff here. So we have a lot of questions coming in as usual. Again, you can enter your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we have team members who are responding to some of the questions in writing. And then we're also going to verbally present some others. We do group some of the questions together because there's lots of themes. There are lots of themes. So one theme, JP, that's coming up immediately is, and I'm getting this a lot too, and it does seem incredible, but how is it that the CEC gets away with lying? So one member is saying, I don't understand how they're getting away with these statements. If we're playing by the rules and seem to be asking for, reasonable changes, how can they make these false claims like around Bill 124, which we've been told repeatedly is a complete fabrication of the meaning in terms of Bill 124. So how are they doing this without any oversight? What do we do with the fact that we're being subjected to these falsehoods repeatedly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is such a good question. And I mean, it's one that we wrestle with constantly as a team. One of the things that we've really tried to maintain throughout this round of bargaining is to take the high road, right? To, present factual information, to literally share every word we say at the table with faculty very transparently and immediately and in both official languages. And the short answer is we can't stop them, right? It's a stacked system, right? So they have also their CEO is a lawyer. They have a very aggressive anti-management law firm that their team there is headed by Tim Lisnick for college faculty now. They're super aggressive and they know exactly where that line is, where they can push it to before they're crossing a threshold into an easy bad faith bargaining claim. Now, that said, we have filed an unfair labor practice around bad faith bargaining with the Ontario Labor Relations Board over some of the tactics that they have been engaging in, such as the abuse of the college email system. And we are countering these claims every time they come up. But it is true, when you're looking at labor relations, it is not a deck that is stacked in favor of workers and faculty or workers in this case. It is absolutely stacked in favor of employers. That said, our best defense is solidarity, and it's talking to one another. And so when we share our experiences, when we share our knowledge, that's the best counter we can have. I wish that I could just go to Graham Lloyd and say, do the right thing, man. That's wrong. And he'd be like, yeah, of course, that's so logical and ethical, and we'll stop misrepresenting and, pretending that it's something that it's not. It's never going to happen, right? What I can say is that I feel like I've talked to more lawyers over the past year than I have in my entire life. And on the Bill 124 question, I feel incredibly confident in claiming that that's simply a falsehood, that anything we're doing is unlawful.
Yeah, and they do seem to think that repetition, if they keep saying the same thing, that we're just going to believe it. And I know that, and I've talked to lots of my colleagues, they've decided to send us an email every single day. We're trying to, and I know the team's committed to this, providing regular communications, but do we really need to do what the CEC does, which is dive bomb our email boxes every single day? I think that this is a question where quality matters better than quantity. But the CEC thinks that if they keep saying the same thing over and over again, we're going to believe it. So as a follow-up to that, then, in terms of the CEC communications, another question that's come in that I've heard lots of people talk about, because it's, the rhetoric gets to us. So one person has a question about the message about PL faculty. I think that one was today. So some partial load faculty are second guessing their position after today's missive about how OPSU's proposal would make things more precarious for partial load faculty. Like, what are our demands so that we can persuade our partial load and full-time colleagues to reject the CEC offer, and understand, the fear mongering that happened in that email that actually were asking to make things worse for partial load faculty, which is kind of bizarre, but they did make that assertion out there in all of our email inboxes today, that our demands would actually make things worse for partial load faculty.
That is such a solid question. I'm going to actually turn this one over to Ravi Ramkasoon Singh, who's been handling a lot of the partial load language and really following this one closely. Ravi, are you able to take a question on the Orwellian misinformation that the CEC has been engaged in on partial load issues?
Yeah, so yeah, that was a weird one today. And really, it's difficult to understand what they're exactly getting at, but I think they don't like the proposal that if a partial load member has the seniority, right, or the service, and they've taught the courses previously, then what we're saying is that then they should get those courses that they have the priority for up to their 12 hours, right, their 12-hour workload. And so that's all we're saying. And so, again, what they were saying today in that missive, it was a bit strange, because we've had, I believe since 2012 was the first time that language entered into the collective agreement around partial load seniority. It's kind of weak, it was weak language at that time, but it was a wedge that we were hoping to build on, and we have since that time. So it's really weird, because that's just simply what, as a partial load member, right? If you have seniority, then yeah, you're going to get offered courses before somebody who has less seniority, if both of you have taught those courses, right? There's nothing new here. So I think, again, it's just a case of the CEC trying to muddy the waters. Nothing more, nothing less, right? The CEC, I'm going to say, I think they're pretty sure, or they're pretty concerned at this point, they're not going to win this vote. And I suspect they know they're not going to win this vote, but they're going to try to throw everything that they can. This is a last gasp for them, right? And so I think you're going to see them throw a lot of stuff out there in these emails over the next couple of weeks that are unclear. A lot of it cloaked in very corporate, corporate speak or corporate babble, right? And so I think expect more of that sort of thing. But yeah, it's that's it. What they said today really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's pretty much, I think, all I can say on that one.
Well, and maybe one follow-up point or comment is that, certainly we saw in the 2015 round of bargaining that the CEC and the colleges asserted repeatedly that partial load faculty have full-time jobs. They don't want jobs. And so, like, this, I think this particular communication is, again, trying to get at the idea that we're going to get rid of these folks, and and they don't even need jobs. But I mean, that's not what I hear. I'm just wondering what you see, because certainly a fraction of partial load faculty might have full-time jobs working in industry, but there's an awful lot of people who need that 12 hours of a livable wage, because this is one of their primary jobs. And I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
Oh, I think you've said it, RM. Basically, yeah, you're absolutely correct, right? And but they tried to make it sound that, again, this is basically the gig economy, right? And so the CEC, like many other employers, they try to portray it as that, people, this is just gig work. People are just, they're just, that this is what they want, right? Is just to have this gig work and put all, put different gig jobs together, and they're just happy doing that, right? And that, these partial load members they're not actually looking for anything more than that, right? And we know that's certainly not the case. We do have, we have different types of partial load members. We have many who are, doing this with the hope of having more security over the long term and perhaps landing a full-time position, right? That's many of our partial load. We also have some partial load who are, they're okay being partial load, that's what fits for them, but they want to continue to be partial load over the long term, right? And have security as a partial load member. And then, yeah, I think, but again, the CC doesn't want to acknowledge those things, right? So
I just want to add to that, Ravi, it's pretty rich coming from a group of people who have fought this hard to ensure that part-time and sessionals have job security, who have unionized representation. It's pretty rich to turn around when you spent like literally tens of millions of dollars fighting job security for contract faculty to then say that your proposals are designed to enhance it. Just want to put that out as a simple comparison too.
Oh, I totally agree, right? And I mean, just that, again, how much they fought against part-time and sessional faculty, certifying as a union, right? They're union busters, right? The CC, we know this is who they are, right? They are who we know them to be. They are into union busting. That's, Exhibit A, what they've done there. And that's exactly what they've been trying to do with all of us, right? They tried it in 2017 and they failed. And they're trying it again in 2021, 22, and they're going to fail again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ravi. Okay, so JP. One member, and I think this is an important point, has said that, at what point when you were giving your presentation, you spoke about the SWOOF, the standard workload form, as a privilege. And this member is concerned that ignores the fact that we are overworked and stressed out, and that by referring to the SWOOF as a privilege, that may create a division between us. And I just, maybe you want to comment on that.
I would absolutely say that's fair comment. Privilege is the wrong choice of word. Sorry, you get going. That we actually, what I'm referring to more is that the SWOOF provides us with at least basic levels of job protections that are not enjoyed by contract faculty. So it's not correct that, it's a privilege. It is a set of rights that is not extended to our contract colleagues. So my deepest apologies for if that came across as an attempt to divide or put a wedge in. I was merely trying to point out that full-time faculty, our workload is maximized. We are equally stressed out. We're having like all the same kinds of levels of mental health concerns and, struggle supporting students. And that, at the very minimum, we have, some level of inadequate protections through the standard workload formula that our contract faculties don't enjoy. But you're correct. That should not have been identified as a privilege. It is a hard fought for right that we had to strike twice for in the 80s to even ensure was there.
Thank you. Absolutely. And that's why we're here. Okay, so lots of other questions. So many people are just commenting about the fact that they don't want to get this captive audience communication from the CEC. It is dehumanizing. Lots of people have commented on this, like, can't we say no? We're getting it repeatedly. Can they do that? And is there anything we can do to say no to this captive audience communication that we're getting?
I'm going to actually offer this over to Rebecca Ward if she's still here thinking about, because I know at Confed they've had a couple of creative responses to the captive audience communications from the colleges. I have been marking mine as phishing when they come up in my college email. And today I sent a letter to my president and vice president of, well, it used to be human resources. Now it's people enablement and experience, because that's clear somehow, and asked them to stop because it was an abuse of the college email system. Rebecca, do you want to talk about what happened at Confed? One of your members, I think, had a really fabulous response to that.
You know, JP, I'm trying to remember what number said, but it was very, very quick and very witty. And essentially, we followed the same path. We marked it as phishing, and he provided a very witty commentary in terms of the kind of content that's coming out. And essentially, you know, we're just getting tired of it. And we've had many members over the last couple of weeks flag as phishing, respond back and said, please, and also respond back to the colleges and said, please remove me from this email listserv. We've had enough. Thank you very much. We don't get much response back from the college, but that's okay. We're exercising our power and our right in that process, and it's feeling good.
That's fantastic. And I think the one thing I just want to point out is whenever somebody tells you we didn't win anything in 2017, and that somebody is inevitably going to be a college manager, the ability to send a response that says this is phishing, that says this is spam, please remove me, is protected under Article 13, academic freedom. Our ability to talk back to the colleges, to offer criticism, to say this is not something that we agree with, is now protected. It's an enshrined right in the collective agreement because we fought for it and we won it and we stood up for it. And now it's our ability to exercise this both for our own, to stand up, to flex that muscle a little bit and to be able to say, I don't want these things. Right? This is an abuse of the college email system. This is not welcome. I'd like to be removed from this email list, to mark it as junk. These kinds of creative responses are absolutely those kinds of tiny, easy things we can do to demonstrate our solidarity to our managers. So if you find these communications to be unwelcome, please exercise the right that you walked 5 weeks to get and tell them you don't want it clearly and loudly. And the more they get it, the more they can't hide behind this pretense that labor relations are hunky-dory at the colleges, because the presidents have been, you know, hiding behind this cloak of, well, bargaining happens at the provincial level, so we can't really tell them what to do. You pay their salaries. That's the answer. You pay their salaries. They've told us repeatedly at the table that the college presidents are the ones who tell the CEC team what to do. So you don't want their email? Tell them you don't want their email. And then tell them to do the right thing, because you have a protection under your collective agreement. And you have a further protection under the college's collective bargaining act because we're currently in a legal strike position. And so that means that you can't be reprised against or experience discipline for engaging in legal action. So you've got these rights, it's time to use them.
Awesome, thank you. I know a lot of folks in my college too have been just hitting phishing. You know, we're not allowed to get other scams in our inbox. So thank you. But another related question on academic freedom and our rights under work to rule. So quite a few members have asked, is it permissible to use the college email system or our learning management systems to invite students to attend the Student Union and OPSU webinar on February 8th? Like, so are we allowed to put that up on our learning management system or tell students about that? Like,
sure. Yeah, there's nothing that should stop. If the colleges are using the email systems and the learning management systems, it's absolutely within bounds. We're telling you it's within bounds. And even better, we've now, if you experience any pushback, the first stop's always your local, right? Talk to your local. And if the manager is telling you you're not allowed to do something and the bargaining team has said, nope, you're absolutely allowed to do this, talk to your local, because what we identify as struck work comes from the team. It doesn't come from the colleges. And what we interpret in terms of the bounds of what's encompassed by that, also the team, not the colleges. And as I just said, if they come at you in any way with like threats of reprisal, these are often very vague threats of reprisal or discipline, by the way. We've yet to see anything executed. Because what happens is once we learn about it, then we get involved and OPSU gets involved. It becomes a central problem. If you have experienced a manager pushing back, there's now a form on the collegefaculty.org website that's a work to rule incident report form. You can fill that out and it immediately comes in centrally so that we can track any trends and actually respond to the colleges very individually. We've sent out lots of letters to individual colleges and individual college managers, or spoken with the local who have, in more cases than us, fixed it right there on the spot. So you have a lot of protections. Feel free to talk to your students. And if they tell you to stop, just let us know. That's all we're asking. Let us know.
Yeah, so I guess further on that, I mean, it's very exciting that the College Student Alliance wants to partner with college faculty to offer this webinar. I think that just says so much, that the students are interested, engaged, and they're co-hosting it. So it's not like we're trying to subject students to some captive audience. This is a webinar organized by the students' own student union. So I think that's a very important distinction to make there, that, you know, like, we're not like subjecting students in the classroom to information about this. We're actually co-working with the students' own union. So with that said, how can we find the information about the student town hall to give to students? And I'm going to ask maybe some member of the team to try to post in the chat, so you have access to that. I mean, it's been sent out on lots of communications, but if you can post in the chat how the link for students to be able to register to that town hall, because it's a super exciting event, and I'm just so inspiring and, you know, amazing that the students want to do this with us.
Yeah, so I've put the link in the chat, from the CSA, from the College Student Alliance, but even more exciting, and this is like, it's the College Student Alliance wanted to host it. So we said, okay, but you've got a whole bunch of other student associations that are part of the system. There's independent student associations, there's the Canadian Federation of Students Ontario, and they immediately said, absolutely, we want to work together on it. So even better, it's the student associations that normally, you know, often have a history of some tension behind this. They all got behind it, right? We went and talked to the CFSO and they said, oh yeah, we'd love to do this. And we're like, okay, you got to know it's with CSA. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's fine. This is great. We think it's a wonderful idea. We don't need to have our names on anything. We just think it's important that students go. And so they're putting together the list of all the independent student associations and doing that reach out as well. And I think that says a lot about the shared commitment that we all have to understanding, like, this is about improving the future of college education. This isn't just about, like, you know, what's good for faculty. The students understand. The minute that you start talking to students, they don't understand our working conditions until we start talking about them. So they don't understand the evaluation, they don't understand partial load, they don't understand contract faculty, but they don't understand that, you know, only 10 colleges have full-time academic librarians, right? Like, that's that 2 of them have outsourced counseling departments entirely, but these are the things that they care about, right? Desperately. And they need to know, because they're the ones that are paying for this education, and they deserve every support we can offer. And we deserve to be supported in providing that.
Yeah, I mean, I recently met with the president of my college student association, and when I was and we were talking about like pandemic safety measures and bargaining and a whole bunch of other things. And, you know, when we explained that, you know, 75% of faculty at our institution don't have 1 minute of paid sick time, the student association president was mortified. They're like, that's what we want our students to have. That's what we're advocating for. I'm like, yes, and 75% of faculty don't have 1 minute of paid sick time during a global pandemic. So like the solidarity with the students is amazing. So we don't have too much more time left, but a couple of questions. Okay, so, and I'm going to bundle these together, but if, okay, we reject the forced offer vote, again, and I know you've already addressed this, but can we expect a general picket line strike? And if not, then what types of increases to work to rule can we expect? Like, what's work to rule going to look in the interim period if we reject the vote and the CEC is still not willing to come back to the table?
Yeah, those are perfectly like really fabulous and reasonable questions. And so a couple of things. One, you can't, it's strategically foolish to spell out exactly what you're planning to do ahead of time, because that gives the employer the ability to respond and try and neutralize it before it even happens. So some of the strategy and some of the creativity has to be not so much an element of surprise, but an element of get as close as we can to the date. So there's a couple of things to this, though. One, as I've said before, and we'll say it again, we will not be out on a picket line on February 18th, on February 19th. And we have time to actually escalate and put pressure on. And the only reason we would need to is once the vote is once the offer is rejected, if the CEC refuses to negotiate, continues to refuse to negotiate, we will still extend voluntary interest arbitration. And if they refuse that, then it is their refusal that causes the escalation. Now, they'd be foolish to do that. Oftentimes, bargaining is a game of chicken, right? There's a lot of bluffing that happens around trying to, an employer will say, we're never going to do this. And then with enough pressure and enough sort of solidarity, they're forced into having to do it. Most employers operate on a principle of, I'm not going to do this unless you make me. Right. And this is an employer that engages in that kind of aggressive bargaining. We're not with an employer who does shared interest bargaining. We're with an employer who is very invested in positional bargaining and adversarial approaches, right? It is awful, Randy. I'm sorry, I just saw something pop up in the chat. I agree with you. It is ridiculous that it is being treated this way. And as I've said, we have done everything we can to stay high road, to find a middle path, to try and meet them halfway on proposals. The only thing that we can't do is give up entirely, right? The possibility of implementing what we need now. We are at we have stripped it down as far as we can go. And we've said, look, if we're at impasse, fine. If you're at impasse, fine. Then let's take it to voluntary binding interest arbitration, because that's where it's going to end up one way or another if you keep holding this absolutely ridiculous line. You can't treat people. You can't say, we respect you, we hear you, we believe in you as colleagues, and then turn around and tell people, these are your working conditions no matter what. We're ignoring every process related to collective bargaining there is. We're not going to have a collaborative table. I got to say, folks, don't look at what, it's not about listening to what they say. Watch what they do, because that's what's determining how this process runs. When you look at what faculty have done, I will stand behind every decision that we made as a team in this round. We have done nothing but try to find a way through it without having to go into a withdrawal of labor. In terms of phase 3, think about where you are in the semester. Think about what February 18th looks like, because that's when we'll get the results of the vote, at some point on February 18th after the OLRB counts them. We have more than half of the semester left to get through. So we've got a lot of time and a number of pressure points that can be brought to bear between February 18th and the end of the semester. So what we're looking at is a very, as I said, it's a precise kind of instrument when you look at, okay, what are the things we can do? There's this, and this that will make it like first phase of the next plan. Okay, that's great. We know exactly what the pinch points are for our chairs and associate deans in terms of getting things done. And we know what we normally do out of our, goodness of our hearts in order to help them get through it. This is not the time to do that. We'll also be issuing probably tomorrow, both the slides from this presentation, but also just a real clear kind of outline of what the principles of work to rule are, so that folks feel empowered to be able to exercise their decision-making authority during this time, right? So that, you know exactly how and why we have your backs. And then we will give you notice, plenty of notice, around the next phase, so that, and we'll do it in consultation again with the local presidents and the bargaining advisory committee, so that we make sure that we're in tune with what you're experiencing on the ground and the effects of what's happening. And we'll continue to listen to all of the whispers that are coming at us from a million different directions about how stressed the employer is and how their strategy is falling apart and how they're issuing increasingly desperate communications to try and convince people that they're doing the right thing in the face of all evidence to the contrary. So what we do is we listen, we respond, we build strategy, we test it, we adjust it accordingly, and we'll continue to do that. There is no rush to strike, period.
Thank you, JP. So we're just about out of time. There's still tons of questions. I'm going to ask that somebody from the team post in the chat different ways that you can connect with us on social media. Of course, always contact your local. But what next? What are the last comments that you want to leave us with?
Listen, we're going to take this, we're going to win it, and we're going to win ourselves a better settlement than what we have right now. That is what our goal is. It's what our goal from the get-go. We were elected to bring forward your demands, to put them on the table, and to fight like heck in order to get them incorporated. We are an experienced team. We're a creative team. And better yet, we are really committed to making sure that this is the best possible deal that we can achieve at the table. This is not a time for rollover deals. This is not a time for simple extensions. This is a time where we see our faculty struggling. We see our comrades, our colleagues out there like trying to do their best in the worst conditions. And we know that you need change now because we need it too. And we know that our students deserve more and should expect more. And I know that it's every professor, instructor, counselor, and librarian's job to do what we can do to help them achieve that, to know that they can expect something more from their faculty, from their colleges, and to build a better system so that we're building a better Ontario, so that we're building a better labor market. We are a barometer by which other post-secondary associations, they watch to see what we do. And we're not doing this out of some sense of accolades. We're doing this because we know we're strong enough to set a higher bar for everybody, for our partial load colleagues, for our students, and for ourselves, right? We all deserve better than what is happening right now. And we will continue this fight until our last days. Like that's it. We are committed to making sure that you experience what you need in the next collective agreement, that there's a chance for change. And if you accept the offer, that chance is eliminated. We get status quo and we continue on, and we will watch our system erode. If you reject the offer, what you're saying is, this isn't good enough. It wasn't good enough in February. It wasn't good enough in November, and it's not good enough now. My students need me, and in order to support them, I need more than what you're giving me right here. So talk to your colleagues, vote no. And if you find that you're getting swayed by the misinformation, or you just want to check in on some facts and be like, look, they just said this, what do you guys think? Let us know. And we'll make sure that we get that communication back out to you so that it's clear again. We will answer these questions as many times as we need to in order to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and knowledgeable about them, because it's up to you. It's up to you to decide what it's going to look like going forward. We've only given you the information that we have, and we trust you to make a decision that is right for you and your students.